In this lesson, we'll explore how to work with Revit's render settings to achieve the look and feel we want for the scene. Alright, so now that we've set the stage for our scene here, we're now ready to explore how to work with Revit's render settings. And before we jump in to rendering and start turning dials, it's important to know how this process works with rendering. You don't want to just automatically crank up the scene to the highest quality level and expect to get a really high quality product in the very end. You're going to possibly eat up, well, guaranteed you're going to eat up a lot of your time, but you're not probably run out of time to make the correct adjustments. So I always like to work with a low quality, make small adjustments, and then kind of gradually increase the quality. And I always take into account my render time for this process. So it's really about a good balance between the time you have to invest in creating a really beautiful scene, but also your knowledge and understanding of the dials that you're turning and why you're turning them. You don't just randomly want to make adjustments. So let's see how this process works. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start off with a really low quality render so I can get an idea of how my shadows are going to start looking, how the sun impacts this particular scene, and how my lighting is going to start looking. And from there, I can gradually make the necessary adjustments I need to achieve the look I want. So to start with our render, we're going to go to View, and we're going to go with this little teapot button here. It's the render button that Revit has. And you should be familiar with this window by now, but we'll go through what each one of these are. I know for sure we're familiar with the lighting since in our first lesson we set the stage by using our lighting. So let's cover what all these other elements are. So the first one here is our button, this render button. This initiates the render process. It's pretty straightforward. But right next to it is the region button. If you recall, a lot of what we were doing when we were setting up this scene, we were taking into account render time early. So we were only populating this scene with geometry that's going to be, or with the necessary geometry that needs to be rendered. This almost acts the same way as we're working with this particular view. So let's say, for instance, I'm working with this view and I want to render, and I want to improve the quality of what's going on with maybe the glass and a reflection or something going on in this wall or this floor lamp. Instead of rendering this entire image, I can tell Revit, hey, by clicking this region, I want you, and you can notice the red box that comes up, and I can click on it. I want you to only focus your energies and attention to a particular region. So when I render this out, only what's within this box is going to be rendered. This is really helpful, and it's really going to save you a lot of time in your process. Another thing that we have on this window here is our quality. So another nice thing that Revit does is it makes working with rendering almost a lot less scientific initially. So when you're doing your quality, you go to this drop down. It's very simple. I have a low, medium, high, best quality. So that's very helpful. That's just really good starting points. But what they also have just below that are custom and also edit. So what custom is if you have a really good understanding of how each of the dials work within this render settings, you can go in and start with a clean slate and adjust and set your dials to exactly where they need to be. A lot of times you may have a template set up for a really good starting point, and this might come in handy. And the second one here is edit. And I really like this one because in my process, I'll start out with a low, make any necessary adjustments I need to make. Then I'll go to medium, making necessary adjustments. And then I'll go to edit. And what I can do is I can edit what's going on within this medium setting. So basically, the medium setting is set on your screen. And if I wanted to edit one particular element within that range of settings or group of settings, I can. And instead of having to go from medium to high, wasting a lot of time, I can go from medium to maybe a one step up with maybe one or two small adjustments. And end result is a rendering that doesn't take as high or as long as a high quality rendering would do. So we'll explore how this works just a little bit. So again, you're familiar with the lighting area here. In our first lesson, we set our lighting, our scheme, our area. So when I click on this, you'll see we have our site location, date, time, so we know how the weather's going to look. We can set all these aspects up of our scene here. Another thing we can do is we can click on our artificial lights here. This is really neat because if this is a chance for you to take some controls over the lighting that we placed throughout our scene here. So as you can see, we've got our pendant lights, we've got our table lamps, we've got our floor lamps. We can group these into groups, and or if you wanted to, we can dim these lights. So right now, they're as bright as they can be. But if we did want to dim those out, I can select any one of these lights. We'll say this pendant light. And the dimming, how this works, it works from 0 to 1, so basically decimals. So if right now it's at 1, so if I go to 0.5, it'll probably be half as bright as it was before, and so on and so forth. So this is a really good opportunity to really take control of the scene and really achieve the feel and look that you want for your scene. But in our case, we have a little bit of artificial lighting throughout our scene, but the main character in our scene here is, one, the furniture layout, but the impact that the sun and the daylighting has in this room. So we're not going to make any adjustments to our dimming of our lights in this course. But it's definitely nice to know that this is there, and to have that control is very powerful. Another element we can adjust here is our background, and this applies more to maybe if we're doing an exterior rendering scene. You probably be very familiar with those. You'll see the exterior of a building at a really nice perspective. It's got all its entourage elements like landscaping, cars, but in the background it's got a really unique and powerful or beautiful sky. This is an opportunity for you to do that. So what you do is you go down to your drop down. In our case, it really won't apply because we're doing an interior rendering, but it's nice to know that this is there. So you can control what's going on with your sky. You can have no clouds, few clouds. You can make it extremely cloudy. Or you can even just bring in a color with a gradient. So if you wanted to keep your background simple and you didn't want a lot of your attention to go to what's going on in the sky, and you wanted most of your attention to be focused on your building or your design, this might be a nice route to go. And then the last one you can select is image. This is a really neat one. You can get some really photorealistic images of the sky brought into your rendering here, maybe from other sources, maybe a Google image search. And the one I usually start out with, once I hit render, and once I see the quality of my render, especially for the scene I'm trying to achieve here, is to adjust my exposure. And we'll explore this here in just a moment. So let's start out with a low quality render setting, now that we're a little bit familiar with what's going on with these options that we do have. So we're not going to go with draft. I know that's going to be really low quality, but we're going to go with low. And then from there, we'll go to medium because I want you to experience the difference in quality. And I also want you to get an understanding of the difference in render time when I go about doing these renders. So I'm going to set it to low. I'm going to click render. All right, so now that my scene's rendered, you can really see what's going on with this image here. It definitely looks a little more realistic than what we had before. So once we render, we have the ability to kind of go back and forth between show model and render. So if I click on this show model here, see, this looks very cartoonish, but when I click back on render, you could tell we're on the path to some realism here. So we're actually at a good place. It's not a bad thing that this doesn't match our expectations for the very, very end. But this gives us an opportunity to kind of explore what's going on within here. We know we're going to have to increase the quality a bit, but we get to see what other areas we might tweak to achieve the look we want. So as I mentioned, I usually start out, especially with the field that I'm trying to adjust or achieve here, is I'm going to adjust my exposure just a bit. It's a bit bright here. So I'm going to click on that, and I can adjust my exposure value. And again, I want to darken this up a little bit because I want the warmth and the orange and the yellow colors from the sun to impact this scene and really give a sense of warmth, comfortable sun in our particular scene, in this case, which is somewhere on the West Coast. So I'm going to adjust this to be a little bit darker, and I'm going to click apply. Now the great thing about this is I don't have to wait on render time to adjust any of these dials. I can simply make the adjustment, click apply, and I get instantaneous gratification. And this is awesome for my thought process, and it is definitely awesome for time management for this process. So I might want to darken this up just a bit, just a little bit, because I really want that sun to glow through my curtain walls on the exterior. Perfect, and it definitely gives me the feel of an evening. So some other adjustments we can make since we're here. I know that we're going to have to make some adjustments to our shadows. We definitely want to achieve some of these soft shadows here going across the ground. I want to improve the precision of these lines. You'll see some jagged lines on anything that's set at an angle. So we're going to have to make some improvements to that as well. And we'll play around with some reflection. So in the next lesson, we'll jump this up to one more extra higher level of quality. We'll examine and get an understanding of the difference in render time, and we'll also play with some of the dials to get us closer to the end result we're trying to achieve.